Welcome back, my name's Steve and thank you for joining me on my photography journey today. Today I want to take a look in a bit more detail about how we can change things in the camera in order to deal with light. So if you remember, I previously spoke about the exposure triangle and there were the three things that we had to talk about. There was ISO, shutter speed and aperture. And all of these we can control, we can change in order to make the light appear how we want it to in our picture. So take a look back at those for a refresher on kind of the physics behind things, and then we'll look at it with some practical examples. Before we go out with our camera, let's remind ourselves where those physical controls are so that we know what we're looking for when we're out in the field. So let's have a look on my camera. One of the things that you can see immediately is this ISO button. So if we press that and then turn this dial, that will increase our ISO if we turn in that direction and decrease our ISO if we turn in that direction. If you've got the barrel of the lens in your hand, you can twist it one way to increase your f number and twist it the other way to decrease your f number. And remember that a lower f number means a bigger aperture, so more light comes in. And then for our final option is our shutter speed. So again, twisting this main dial will increase your shutter speed, so it will open and close faster, so less light will get in. So that's 1/3200th of a second. And then going back the other way, we're down to a 30th of a second, or even slower, so that it's open for longer. And then of course you've got the options across the bottom here as well on the touch screen. So pressing onto any of them will open up the menu for them. You can go in small increments or larger increments, either up or down, and then just press the return arrow to get back to the main screen. And the same for the aperture and the same for the shutter speed. So you can just go through those like this. Perfect. So now that we know where those physical controls are, let's get outside and take some pictures with it and see what we can do, put it into practice. So now we're out in the garden and this scene behind me is what we're going to use. So it's wood, it's kind of in the shadow a bit, there's some dark, there's some lights, there's some perspective that we can use. So let's have a look and see what we can do with it. So this is the scene that we've got to look at, and currently I'm in auto mode. So let's have a quick look at what happens here. So that's our first picture taken. And that now means that we have a frame of reference for what we can do next. So let's change it to manual mode. So we change the dial on the top of the camera round to M. So normally I would use a custom mode that I've got saved on my camera for this, but today, so that we can all start off in the same place, I'm going to start just on M. So manual modes, this is where we begin with. Now remember, we've got the three different things to look at. We've got the shutter speed, the aperture and the ISO. So this is on 1/200th of a second, f 1.8 and ISO 100. So let's take a picture there. And as you can see, looking at the scale on the right hand side, we are slightly underexposed. So let's fix that. So there's different ways that we can do this. Let's begin by increasing the ISO. And now you can see that the exposure meter is at 0. So that means we are correctly exposed as far as everything else is concerned. So let's take a picture there. And you can see with the focusing, it's on autofocus. So that's where the yellow box comes in. Let's change that to manual. So let's go through the menu. Let's go into menu, and then we want to go to our shooting setup menu, and then find the right settings in here. So we'll scroll all the way down. And we're going to go for focus mode to single. Okay. And in the AF area mode, we will go to single point. so we can choose one thing to focus on. So let's come back out to our camera. So now you can see our red box on here, and that is what we use to choose our focus point. So if I just hold down the AF on button, it will turn green to say that we're focusing on this one particular log. The same is true if you just half press the shutter button and then press it all the way to take the picture. So let's say that we wanted to have a wider depth of field, so we wanted to have more in focus. For that we would need to change our aperture, so let's change that now. Let's go for f9. So now everything will be in focus, but we can't see it. So we now have two different options. We can either change our ISO or we can change our shutter speed. Let's do one at a time. Let's increase our ISO first, until again we've got that exposure meter on the 0 line. There we go. So ISO 5000, f9, 1/200th of a second. Half press the shutter button and then take the picture. But let's put this all the way back down. Let's go back down to 100, which is the minimum on here. There we go. Now the other way that we can do this is if we wanted to keep our ISO nice and low, we can then change our shutter speed. So we want the shutter to be open for longer, so we want a smaller number here. So let's go down, and again we're aiming for a 0 on the exposure line. There we go. So 1/4, which means 1/4 of a second. So again, I'll half press the shutter button and then take that picture. Now this is fine while you're on a tripod like I am at the moment, but if you wanted to take a shot like this or slower, then you won't be able to use the camera in your hand. You'll have to use a tripod. Now let's go the other way and assume that we want to take a long exposure picture. So let's go for a whole second. But again, we're now too bright, so what could we change? We could change our ISO, but we can only go up, so that doesn't really help there. So what we'll do instead is go to a smaller aperture, a higher number. Now I can only go to f16 on here, and that's just slightly overexposed, but let's take that picture. Now a good idea when you're taking pictures like this with longer exposures is to use a delayed release, so that you're not getting any movement in the camera from pressing the button. So how we do that, let's go into the menu again. So we want to go into our shooting display exposure delay mode, so into here, and let's just choose a second and come back out. And now what it's going to do is delay things for a second from when I press the button. So press and hold, and that gives us our focus. Now press all the way, it waits a second, and then it takes that exposure for that 1 second. So now what we'll do is add our ND filter to the lens. So this just screws on to the front of the lens like this. And then as you can see, it's a lot darker. So what we want to do is increase our time that the shutter's open. So again, we're aiming for the 0. Okay, we don't quite get there like that, so let's change this. That's our aperture. And there we go. So again, if you just press it halfway down and then all the way down, and then that takes our exposure. So having the ND filter just means that you can then have a longer exposure time, which makes life easier for capturing things like moving water and different effects that you want. There we go. Right, let's go back and have a look at these, and then we'll carry on from there. So now that we're back inside, let's take a look at those pictures that we've just taken. We can compare what they look like, see how the settings change things, and work out what's the best option. So this is the auto one, so this was our reference picture. Looks okay. A bit darker here with our first manual one. The shadows are a bit darker, aren't they? A bit brighter. This is about the same as the auto one, I think. And a bit brighter still with the 1 second exposure. And then we added the ND filter. A bit darker again, but I quite like that one. That's quite nice. Let's look at them all together. And they're all very similar, but as you can see, we made lots of changes and still got similar kind of results. So lots of options. So just a quick one this week, just to cover some of these basics. Remember, you can always look back at the previous videos to see if there's anything else that you can pick up from those. And have a great week, put some of these into practice. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you again next week on my photography journey. Have a great week. Bye.